It all started in the heart of Seoul, during a summer evening when the sky blushed with the hues of twilight. Jisoo, an ordinary guy from a modest family, lived a life that could only be described as unremarkable. He worked a regular job as an office clerk, clocking in hours at a mid-tier construction company. His routine consisted of early morning commutes, lunch breaks with convenience store food, and evenings spent watching TV dramas in his small studio apartment. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and for Jisoo, that was enough. One day, everything changed. Jisoo, on his way to a company event, stopped by a cafe near Gangnam. He was running late and needed a quick coffee to power through the night. As he approached the counter, he found himself standing behind a woman who seemed out of place. She was dressed in an elegant designer dress, her posture regal, and her aura commanding. Her presence was magnetic, and even though Jisoo had never been one to stare, he couldn't help but notice her. The woman glanced over her shoulder and caught him looking. Jisoo, embarrassed, turned away. But before he could retreat into his awkwardness, she smiled and asked, "First time here?" Jisoo fumbled with his words. Yeah, just grabbing a coffee before work. Do you work around here?" she asked, her eyes curious yet warm. "Yes," he answered, trying to compose himself. Just in the construction office nearby, the conversation flowed easily after that. Her name was Soyeon, and though she didn't reveal much about herself initially, it was obvious from her appearance and demeanor that she came from money. Still, she wasn't arrogant or distant. Instead, she was charming, funny, and down-to-earth, which surprised Jisoo. Before they parted, Soyeon handed him her business card and suggested they meet again. What Jisoo didn't know at the time was that Soyeon was not just rich, was a chaebol heiress, the daughter of one of South Korea's largest conglomerates. Her father's empire spanned industries from electronics to real estate, making her one of the most sought-after women in the country. Yet, none of that seemed to matter in those early days. When Soyeon and Jisoo began seeing each other regularly, their dates were surprisingly low-key. They went to small cafes, walked along the Han River, and watched movies in modest theaters. To Jisoo, Soyeon was just a beautiful, kind-hearted woman who happened to have expensive tastes. But nothing about her screamed heiress. As months turned into years, their relationship deepened. Despite the occasional clash of their worlds, Jisoo's modest upbringing and Soyeon's lavish lifestyle, they found comfort in each other's company. Jisoo fell deeply in love with her, and against all odds, Soyeon seemed to reciprocate his feelings. When she introduced him to her family, Jisoo felt like he had entered a world beyond his imagination. Her parents, though initially skeptical of their daughter's choice, accepted him, albeit grudgingly. They were always polite but distant, as though waiting for the day Soyeon would come to her senses and realize she was too good for him. Eventually, the day came when Soyeon proposed. Yes, she proposed to him on a crisp autumn evening in Namsan Park. They had been dating for over 3 years. And though Jisoo had dreamed of asking her himself, he never imagined that someone like her would want to marry someone like him. But Soyeon was confident, assertive, and most importantly, she loved him. Their wedding was an extravagant affair, filled with the glitter of high society. The media had a field day covering the union of the chaebol princess and her humble groom. Jisoo, however, was mostly concerned with Soyeon's happiness. He thought they had something special, something unbreakable, despite the differences in their status. But marriage, as Jisoo soon learned, wasn't the fairy tale he had hoped for. As the years went by, Jisoo felt the growing distance between him and Soyeon. Her work took her away for weeks at a time, attending board meetings, conferences, and networking events with other chaebol heirs. Jisoo, still working his office job, often found himself alone in their luxurious apartment. The disparity between their lives became more apparent as Soyeon's priorities shifted. She became more invested in her family's company, and Jisoo was left to feel like a relic of her past, something she had outgrown. One day, while attending a high-profile charity event with Soyeon, Jisoo noticed something odd. Soyeon was unusually close to another man, a fellow chaebol, Lee Min-hyuk, a charismatic heir to a rival conglomerate. They laughed together, exchanged glances that seemed too intimate for comfort. And when Soyeon thought no one was looking, Jisoo saw her hand brush against Minhyuk's. A cold knot formed in Jisoo's stomach, but he said nothing that night. It wasn't until weeks later, after some sleepless nights and subtle investigations, that Jisoo discovered the truth. Soyeon had been cheating on him with Minhyuk for over a year. They had rekindled an old relationship, one that predated her involvement with Jisoo, and it hadn't taken long for them to resume their affair. Devastated, Jisoo confronted Soyeon. She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked at him with cold indifference, as though the emotional bond they once shared had dissolved into nothing. "It's complicated," she said, brushing off the affair as if it were a minor inconvenience. "This is just how things are in our world." Jisoo was shattered. He wanted a divorce. He couldn't continue living in the shadow of her betrayal. But when he consulted her lawyers, he was hit with a brutal reality. A divorce would leave him with nothing. Soyeon's legal team was ruthless, and they made it clear that every asset, every penny, was tied to her family's fortune. If he left, he would be penniless, with no compensation or alimony. The prenuptial agreement he had signed all those years ago, in his naivety and love for her, had sealed his fate. Despair turned to rage. Jisoo couldn't simply walk away, humiliated and destitute. He had given everything to Soyeon, and now she was not only throwing him aside, but also forcing him to stay trapped in a loveless marriage to protect her image. Worse, Minhyuk was still lurking in the shadows, playing the part of her secret lover, while Jisoo was left to suffer in silence. But Jisoo wasn't going to suffer forever. He began planning his revenge, quietly, methodically. He knew that striking out impulsively wouldn't work against someone as powerful as Soyeon. He needed to be smart. Over the next year, he started gathering evidence, tracking her meetings with Minhyuk, collecting incriminating photos, and recording conversations that exposed their affair. He knew that confronting her directly wouldn't work, but if he could take everything she valued, her reputation, her power, her family's legacy, he could destroy her from within. Jisoo's plan wasn't just to expose the affair, it was to unravel the entire fabric of her family's empire. He began leaking the information to the media, slowly at first, creating rumors that planted seeds of doubt in the minds of shareholders and the public. He also befriended key figures in the business world who had grudges against Soyeon's family, feeding them insider information that would destabilize their business operations. All the while, Soyeon and Minhyuk were oblivious, still caught up in their web of deception. They didn't realize that the man they had underestimated, the ordinary guy from a modest background, was about to bring their entire world crashing down. As Jisoo's revenge unfolded, the cracks in Soyeon's life began to show. Financial scandals, business deals gone wrong, and rumors of infidelity swirled around her. Her family, once untouchable, became the subject of public scrutiny. Minhyuk, too, found himself entangled in the fallout, as his own family distanced themselves from him to avoid the damage. Jisoo watched it all from the sidelines, satisfied, as the empire Soyeon had prioritized over their marriage crumbled before her eyes. As the chaos Jisoo had set in motion began to unravel, Soyeon grew increasingly paranoid. She had always been confident in her position, both as a chaebol heiress and in her personal life. But now, her family's conglomerate was on shaky ground, and her relationship with Minhyuk was becoming a source of whispered scandal among her elite social circles. Every day, new rumors surfaced, rumors Jisoo had carefully planted. They painted Soyeon as a reckless leader, involved in secret dealings and an affair with a man from a rival conglomerate. The media, always hungry for drama involving the wealthy elite, pounced on the story. Soyeon's father, a man who had built his empire on reputation and control, began losing faith in his daughter's leadership. His health had been in decline for years, and he had been grooming Soyeon to take over the family business. But now, with every business article and news program questioning her integrity, he was reconsidering. Minhyuk, once seen as an asset because of his family's influence, became a liability as their affair grew more public. Jisoo, who had always been on the periphery of Soyeon's world, began to quietly push forward the second phase of his plan. While the public destruction of Soyeon's image was satisfying, He wanted something deeper, something that would leave her personally broken. He needed to hit her where it hurt most, her pride, her legacy, and her standing in the world of chaebols. To do this, Jisoo turned his attention to Minhyuk. Unlike Soyeon, Minhyuk had not been raised to bear the weight of a business empire. His charm had always carried him, but Jisoo knew that beneath that confident exterior was a man who craved power, but didn't have the stomach for a real fight. Jisoo began leaking damaging information about Minhyuk's dealings, financial missteps, questionable investments, and his personal life. At first, it was small leaks, barely noticeable, but as the months passed, the pressure on Minhyuk began to mount. His family, eager to protect their own name, started to distance themselves from him, pulling him out of key business roles and leaving him adrift in the very world he thought he could dominate. Meanwhile, Soyeon's once perfect facade was crumbling. She found herself isolated. Her family's board of directors no longer trusted her. Shareholders were pulling out, and her personal life was in shambles. She tried to confront Jisoo several times, but he remained cool, calm, and dismissive. He had become a ghost in her life, distant, yet always watching, always present. Soyeon, the woman who once commanded the room with her mere presence, was now the subject of gossip, her name whispered in hushed tones as her reputation fell apart. The final blow came when Jisoo, after months of careful planning, leaked the most damaging piece of evidence, the details of Soyeon's prenuptial agreement and her affair with Minhyuk. In a world where image was everything, the revelation that she had betrayed her loyal husband, especially one as humble and devoted as Jisoo, ignited a media firestorm. Public opinion, which had once been indifferent to their marriage, now turned viciously against Soyeon. She became a symbol of greed and infidelity, the very embodiment of the cold-hearted chaebol stereotype. Her family, desperate to salvage their business, forced her to step down from her role in the company. They could no longer afford the scandal she brought. Soyeon's father, heartbroken and defeated, publicly announced his retirement, citing health reasons, but it was clear to everyone that the shame Soyeon had brought upon their name had pushed him to the edge. As for Minhyuk, his family completely severed ties with him, casting him out of their inner circle. He was left to fend for himself, with no business, no power, and no influence. His charm had faded, and without his family's backing, he was little more than a man whose name was synonymous with failure. Jisoo watched from the sidelines as both Soyeon and Minhyuk fell. He had spent years meticulously planning their downfall. Jisoo received a call. It was Soyeon. Her voice, once so confident and commanding, was now soft, almost fragile. "I know it was you," she said, her tone heavy with resignation. "You did this." Jisoo didn't deny it. "You destroyed us, Soyeon," he said, his voice cold. "I just made sure you paid the price." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, with a weary sigh, Soyeon spoke again. "I loved you, Jisoo. Maybe not in the way you wanted, but I did." Jisoo felt a pang of something: regret, sorrow, or perhaps just exhaustion. It doesn't matter anymore. After Jisoo's phone call with Soyeon, something shifted inside him. The thirst for revenge that had driven him for so long began to wane, replaced by a desire for peace. He had been consumed by hatred, but he realized that what he truly wanted was to move on with his life, to leave behind the toxic relationship that had brought him so much pain. The next morning, Jisoo decided to file for divorce. But this time, he wasn't going in as a defeated man, scared of being left penniless. With the leverage he had gained through his careful planning, proof of Soyeon's affair, her mismanagement of the company, and the destruction of her public image, Jisoo knew he had a strong case. He consulted with one of the best divorce attorneys in Seoul, someone who had a reputation for securing fair settlements in high-profile cases. Armed with evidence, Jisoo entered negotiations with a newfound sense of control. Soyeon, already reeling from the fallout of her public disgrace, was in no position to contest. Her lawyers knew that fighting Jisoo in court would only prolong the scandal and potentially drag her family further into the mud. After a tense few weeks of negotiations, a settlement was reached. Jisoo walked away with more than just a fraction of their assets. He secured a significant portion of the properties they had shared, along with a financial settlement that would set him up comfortably for life. It wasn't about the money for him, but about justice. He had given everything to the marriage, and now, for the first time, he felt like he had received something in return. With the divorce finalized, Jisoo moved into a modest yet beautiful house on the outskirts of Seoul, nestled in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood. The weight that had been pressing down on him for years began to lift. His mornings were now filled with the simple pleasures of life, taking walks in the park, drinking coffee at his favorite local cafe, and pursuing hobbies he had long neglected. He even reconnected with old friends, people he had lost touch with during his tumultuous marriage. For the first time in years, Jisoo felt at peace. He found solace in the routine of his new life, and the anger that had once consumed him faded into the background. He wasn't the same man he had been when he first met Soyeon, but he was finally free to become someone new, someone happier. Meanwhile, Soyeon's life had taken a different turn. After stepping down as president of her family's company, she had retreated from the public eye, but her story was far from over. The scandal surrounding her affair had made her a tabloid sensation, but behind closed doors, her family remained fiercely loyal. Despite the damage to their reputation, the Shin family still controlled vast wealth and influence, and they weren't about to let Soyeon fade into obscurity. Her father, now retired, was still deeply involved in the family business, and while Soyeon could no longer be the public face of the conglomerate, she wasn't entirely out of the game. In secret, Soyeon worked alongside her father and a small, trusted circle of executives, helping to rebuild the company's image and stabilize their operations. While the board had forced her to step down officially, they allowed her to play a behind-the-scenes role, managing key decisions and strategies without drawing public attention. For Soyeon, the transition was humbling. Gone were the days of commanding boardrooms and making public appearances. Now, she operated in the shadows, carefully maneuvering her family's interests with the precision of someone who had learned from her mistakes. She wasn't the reckless, confident woman she had once been. The scandal had forced her to confront her flaws and weaknesses. But Soyeon's life wasn't just about business. The affair with Minhyuk had ended almost as quickly as it had begun, its allure shattered by the consequences of their actions. Soyeon found herself alone, reflecting on the choices that had led her to this point. She missed the simplicity of her earlier days with Jisoo, before the power, the money, and the pressure of her family's expectations had clouded her judgment. But Soyeon was a survivor, and rather than wallow in regret, she focused on rebuilding her life from the ground up. Over time, Soyeon began to regain some of her old confidence, though it was tempered by the wisdom she had gained from her fall. She continued to work with her family behind closed doors, helping to steer the company through the turbulent waters of the corporate world. While she would never return to the public spotlight as the face of the conglomerate, her influence remained strong, and those in the know understood that Soyeon was still a force to be reckoned with. Occasionally, Soyeon would hear news of Jisoo. She knew that he had moved on, living a quiet life far from the chaos of the elite world she inhabited. Though they never spoke after the divorce, she often wondered how he was doing. There was a part of her that wished things had turned out differently, that she had been able to hold on to the love they had shared in the beginning. But life had taken them down different paths, and Soyeon had come to accept that some mistakes couldn't be undone. For Jisoo, the future was full of possibility. With the weight of his past behind him, he embraced the freedom that came with his new life. He started a small business, a coffee shop in the neighborhood where he had found peace. The shop became a local favorite, known for its warm atmosphere and excellent coffee. It was a far cry from the high-stakes world of chaebols and corporate takeovers, but it was his, and that was all that mattered. As the months turned into years, Jisoo found happiness in the everyday moments. He began dating again, though this time, he chose someone who valued the simple life as much as he did. They spent their days hiking, exploring Seoul's quieter spots, and enjoying the peace they had both longed for.